My name is Christie, and at 35 years old, I built a successful web development business in Boston, far from my Chicago roots. Growing up in a family that always favored my younger sister Megan was tough, but I thought funding her dream Hawaiian wedding might finally heal our relationship. I never imagined that after spending $35,000, I would receive a text saying, "You're not invited. Your sister doesn't want you there." Their betrayal taught me the hardest lesson about family, money, and self-respect. Before I dive into this story of family betrayal and how I finally stood up for myself, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to set boundaries with family members who only valued what you could give them. I grew up in a blue-collar neighborhood on the south side of Chicago. Our family wasn't poor, but we definitely watched our spending carefully. My dad, Robert, worked as a foreman at a manufacturing plant, and my mom, Linda, was an administrative assistant at an insurance company. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom house, and while we never went hungry, there were plenty of times when extras were out of the question. From my earliest memories, it was clear that my younger sister Megan was the favorite child. She was 3 years younger than me, outgoing and sociable, while I was more reserved and focused on academics. When Megan wanted dance lessons, my parents found a way to pay for them. When I needed a new graphing calculator for advanced math, I worked extra shifts at the local grocery store to save up. The pattern continued throughout our childhood. Megan's achievements were celebrated with family dinners and proud announcements. My straight-A report cards and academic awards were met with casual nods and comments like, "That's nice, Christie, but not everyone is into that school stuff." Despite the obvious favoritism, I channeled my energy into education. I studied relentlessly, joined every academic club I could, and applied for every scholarship available. By senior year, my hard work paid off when I received a full scholarship to study computer science at a prestigious university in Massachusetts. The night I got my acceptance letter, I excitedly showed my parents. Dad glanced at it and said, "That's pretty far away. You know college isn't everything," Mom added. "Just don't get too full of yourself with all this education stuff." Neither of them attended my high school graduation because Megan had a dance recital the same day. Those 4 years of college were transformative. Away from my family's shadow, I thrived academically and socially. I discovered my talent for web development and began taking on small freelance projects alongside my studies. By graduation, I had already built a modest client base. Instead of returning to Chicago, I decided to stay in Boston and build my life there. I started my web development business from my tiny studio apartment, working 18-hour days to establish myself. The first 2 years were brutally difficult. I lived on ramen noodles and coffee, pouring every dollar back into growing my business. Gradually, my reputation for clean code and reliable service spread. I began landing bigger clients, then hired my first employee, then moved into a proper office space. By the time I turned 30, my company employed 15 people and served clients across the country. I finally bought myself a comfortable condo in a nice part of the city and allowed myself some of the luxuries I'd denied for so long. Throughout this time, my contact with family remained minimal. I called on birthdays and major holidays, sent gifts for Christmas, and visited Chicago once a year for a brief, awkward dinner. My parents rarely asked about my business success, and when they did, it was usually with some dismissive comment about computer people making too much money. Megan's life took a different path. She dropped out of community college after 1 semester, cycled through various jobs, and dated a series of questionable boyfriends. Despite her struggles, my parents continued to praise her free spirit and helped her financially whenever she needed it, which was often. 3 years ago, I decided to make more effort with my family. Maybe it was hitting my 30s, or perhaps it was the loneliness that sometimes came with being so far from my roots. Whatever the reason, I began calling more regularly, sending more thoughtful gifts, and visiting Chicago twice a year instead of once. My effort seemed to be working, at least somewhat. Conversations became slightly less strained. My mom occasionally asked genuine questions about my life in Boston. My dad even mentioned being proud of me once, though it was awkward and quickly glossed over. Then last year, Megan called me with big news. She had gotten engaged to Bradley, a musician she had been dating for 8 months. Bradley seemed nice enough the one time we video chatted, though his career as a bass player in a local band didn't appear to be particularly lucrative. "We want to have a destination wedding in Hawaii," Megan gushed during our call. "It will be so perfect with the beach and the sunset." I congratulated her sincerely but wondered silently how she planned to afford such an extravagant event. Megan was working as a receptionist at a hair salon, and Bradley's band played mostly weekend gigs at local bars. 2 weeks later, Megan called again, this time with my parents also on the line. The conversation circled around wedding plans until Megan finally said, "So, Christie, we were thinking since you're doing so well with your computer business and everything, maybe you could help us out with some of the wedding costs? Just the venue and a few basics." I hesitated. A destination wedding in Hawaii would be expensive, and the venue and a few basics sounded deliberately vague. But here was a chance to finally be valued by my family, to be included in an important event, to perhaps heal some old wounds. "Let me think about it," I said. "Can you send me some information about what you're looking at cost-wise?" The next day, Megan sent a spreadsheet with estimated costs. The basics she mentioned included the beachfront venue, catering for 60 guests, photography, flowers, and a wedding planner. The total came to just over $45,000. I sat staring at the number for a long time. It was a significant amount, but not one that would damage my financial stability. And perhaps this generous act would finally earn me the familial warmth I had always craved. After sleeping on it, I made my decision. I would fund the majority of Megan's wedding. I told myself it was because I wanted her to have her dream day. But deep down, I knew I was still that kid desperate for his family's approval. I arranged a video call with Megan, Bradley, and my parents to discuss the wedding. Sitting in my home office with the Boston skyline behind me, I made my offer. "I've been thinking about your wedding plans," I said carefully. "And I want to help make this special for you, Megan. I'm prepared to cover the costs for the venue, catering, photography, and the wedding planner." There was a moment of silence before Megan squealed with delight. "Oh my God! Christie! Are you serious? That would be amazing! Oh." My parents exchanged glances before my mother said, "That's very generous of you, Christie." Bradley nodded enthusiastically. "Dude, that's incredible. Thank you so much." I felt a warm glow of satisfaction. For once, my family seemed genuinely appreciative of me. "I want to be involved in the planning process too," I added. "This is a big investment, and I want to make sure everything goes smoothly." Of course, Megan agreed quickly. "We want you to be part of everything." We discussed the budget in detail. I confirmed I would cover up to $45,000 for the key expenses. Megan and Bradley would handle their attire, the rehearsal dinner, and some smaller items. My parents offered to pay for Megan's wedding dress. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into wedding planning with enthusiasm. I took time away from my business, delegating projects to my senior developers, so I could focus on helping Megan. I researched Hawaiian wedding venues extensively, comparing prices, reviews, and availability. I used my tech skills to create a comprehensive wedding website with all the information guests would need about travel, accommodations, and island activities. I designed a digital invitation system that would save paper and make RSVPs easier to track. I set up a shared cloud storage folder where we could keep all the wedding documents, contracts, vendor information, and planning spreadsheets organized. Megan seemed genuinely excited to have my help. We had video calls several times a week to discuss options and make decisions. For the first time in our lives, we were collaborating rather than competing for attention. It felt good. I even caught myself thinking that perhaps all those years of distance and resentment might finally be healing. After extensive research, we selected a stunning beachfront property on Maui for the ceremony and reception. The venue wasn't cheap, but the photos looked magical, with palm trees swaying against turquoise waters and a perfectly positioned sunset view. I made the $15,000 deposit from my personal account. Next came the wedding planner. We interviewed 3 candidates via video call before selecting Alani, a local Hawaiian planner with 10 years of experience and excellent reviews. She was professional, detail-oriented, and seemed to genuinely connect with Megan's vision. I paid her $5,000 retainer. The photographer was another significant expense. We chose a husband and wife team whose portfolio showcased exactly the romantic, dreamy style Megan wanted. Their package included engagement photos, full-day wedding coverage, and a sunset session the day after. That was another $4,000 deposit. For catering, Alani recommended a local company specializing in fusion cuisine that blended traditional Hawaiian flavors with modern presentations. After a virtual tasting where the caterer shipped sample boxes to both Megan in Chicago and me in Boston, we selected a menu. I put down the $7,000 deposit. Throughout this process, I made all payments directly from my accounts. Each time I transferred thousands of dollars, I reminded myself that this was an investment in family relationships, not just a wedding. As the planning progressed, I found myself growing closer to Megan. We talked about more than just wedding details. She shared stories about her relationship with Bradley, her hopes for their future together. I opened up about my life in Boston, my business challenges and successes. It felt like we were building the sibling relationship we had never had growing up. But around 3 months into the planning process, I began noticing subtle shifts. Megan started taking longer to respond to my messages. Our video calls became shorter and less frequent. Sometimes when we did talk, I could tell she was distracted or impatient. One evening, I called to discuss the floral arrangements, and Megan answered while clearly in the middle of something else. "Hey, do you have time to talk about the flowers?" I asked. "Not really," she said. "We already decided on the tropical package with the orchids. Actually, I wanted to discuss the centerpieces. The florist sent some new options that might work better with the table layout." Megan sighed audibly. "Just pick whatever you think is best. You're paying for it anyway." Her tone caught me off guard. "I thought you wanted to be involved in these decisions." "I do. But you're being so controlling about every little detail. Just make a decision and let me know." After she hung up, I sat there feeling confused and hurt. Controlling? I was just trying to make sure her wedding was perfect. Was I overstepping? Despite this interaction, I continued with the planning. I told myself Megan was probably just stressed about the wedding, as most brides are. I decided to be more conscious of giving her space to make her own decisions. But as the weeks continued, more red flags appeared. Megan began making decisions without consulting me, then simply informing me after the fact. She added services and upgrades to various vendors, increasing costs beyond our agreed budget. When I gently raised concerns, she would respond with comments like, "It's just money to you anyway, right?" Still, I ignored these warning signs. I was too invested, both financially and emotionally, to acknowledge that perhaps my hopes for reconciliation were built on sand. As the wedding date approached, I had spent nearly 3 months intensively planning and coordinating from Boston. My business partners had been understanding, but I knew I needed to refocus on work soon. Fortunately, most of the major decisions had been made, and Alani, the wedding planner, was handling the on-the-ground details in Hawaii. By this point, I had transferred $30,000 to various vendors, with another $15,000 scheduled in final payments closer to the wedding date. It was a significant amount, but seeing how things were coming together gave me satisfaction. The venue looked stunning in the updated photos Alani sent. The menu tasting had gone well, and the photographer had already captured some beautiful engagement shots during Megan and Bradley's brief visit to Hawaii. However, the subtle tensions I had noticed earlier were growing more pronounced. One afternoon, I was reviewing the shared planning folder when I noticed a document I hadn't seen before. It was a revised guest list that had grown from the original 60 people to nearly 80. I immediately called Megan. "Hey, I just saw the updated guest list. When did we decide to add 20 more people?" There was a pause before Megan answered. "Bradley's band got more popular lately, and we need to invite some industry people. Plus, Mom and Dad wanted to include some of their friends." "Megan, that's going to significantly increase our catering costs and potentially change our venue setup. We agreed on 60 guests when I set the budget." "Well, things change," she said flippantly. "It's not like you can't afford it. That's not the point," I tried to explain. "We made a plan together, and now you're changing it." without even discussing it with me. "It's my wedding, Christie," she snapped. "Stop trying to control everything just because you're paying for it." The conversation ended with tension hanging in the air. I felt frustrated and unappreciated, but I also wondered if I was being unreasonable. After all, it was her wedding day. Maybe I was being too rigid about the budget. A week later, I was on a business call when a notification popped up on my screen. Megan had shared a new document with me, a contract for a videographer that would add another $4,000 to the total. There had been no discussion about this addition. When I called her later, the conversation quickly turned heated. "We never talked about adding a videographer," I said, trying to keep my tone measured. "Bradley and I decided we really want one. All the best weddings have video now." "That's fine, but we should have discussed it first. The budget is already stretched with the additional guests." Megan's voice took on a defensive edge. "I didn't realize I needed your permission for every decision about my own wedding." "It's not about permission, Megan. It's about respect and communication, especially when I'm covering these costs." "This is exactly why I didn't bring it up before," she retorted. "You make everything about the money. If you don't want to pay for the videographer, just say so, instead of making me feel guilty." I sighed, feeling trapped. "I'll cover the videographer. Just please consult with me before making any other additions." After hanging up, I poured myself a drink and stared out at the Boston skyline from my condo window. Something felt off about this entire situation, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. The next day, I called my mother, hoping for some perspective. "Mom, has Megan mentioned anything about the wedding planning to you? Things seem a bit tense lately." There was a pause before she answered. "Well, she has mentioned feeling like you're being a bit overbearing with all the planning details." Her words stung. "Overbearing? I'm just trying to help organize everything and make sure we stay on track." "I know, dear, but it is her special day. Maybe you could step back a little and let her make more of the decisions, even when those decisions add thousands to the budget I'm covering?" I asked, unable to keep the frustration from my voice. "No one forced you to pay for the wedding, Christie," my mother said, her tone cooling. "If it's too much for you, just say so." The conversation left me feeling even more confused and hurt. It seemed like my family viewed my financial contribution as an obligation rather than a generous gift. That weekend, I flew to Chicago for what was supposed to be a final planning meeting with Megan, Bradley, and my parents before the wedding, which was now just 6 weeks away. We met at a restaurant near my parents' house, and from the moment I arrived, I could sense an unusual tension. Throughout dinner, I noticed odd exchanges of glances between my family members. When I brought up wedding details, my input was repeatedly dismissed or overruled. At one point, Bradley's mother called, and he stepped away to take the call. When he returned, he gave Megan a meaningful look that she acknowledged with a slight nod. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "Everything's fine," Megan said quickly. "Just some last-minute details with Bradley's family." Later in the evening, I overheard a fragment of conversation between Megan and my mother in the restaurant hallway. "Don't know how much longer I can deal with Christie's controlling behavior," Megan was saying. "He acts like the wedding is all about him just because he's paying for it." "I know, honey," my mother replied soothingly. "Just a few more weeks and it will all be over." I stepped back, feeling as though I'd been punched in the stomach. Was that really how they saw my involvement? As something to be endured rather than appreciated? The next morning, before flying back to Boston, I met with a college friend for coffee. As we caught up, I mentioned my role in planning Megan's wedding. "That's incredibly generous of you," my friend said. "Your sister must be so grateful." I hesitated before responding. "Actually, I'm not sure that she is." "What do you mean?" "It's just, there have been some tensions. Sometimes I feel like they see me as a checkbook rather than a brother who wants to be part of this important event." My friend looked surprised. "That doesn't seem right. Have you talked to Megan about how you feel?" "I've tried, but the conversations never go well. She accuses me of being controlling or making everything about money." "And you've already spent how much?" "About $35,000 so far, with another $10,000 or $15,000 in final payments coming due soon." My friend whistled. That's a lot to invest in someone who doesn't seem to appreciate it. His words stayed with me on the flight back to Boston. Was I being taken advantage of? Had I been so desperate for family connection that I'd allowed myself to become nothing more than a funding source? Back in Boston, I threw myself into work, trying to catch up on the projects I'd neglected during wedding planning. But my mind kept returning to the uncomfortable realizations from the Chicago trip. One evening, I received a call from my cousin Thomas, who had always been kind to me growing up despite being closer to Megan's age. "Hey Christie, how's the wedding planning going?" "It's going," I replied noncommittally. "How did you know I was involved in the planning?" There was an awkward pause. "Oh, I just assumed since you're family." "Thomas, what aren't you telling me?" he sighed. "Look, I probably shouldn't say anything, but I think you should know. Megan's been telling everyone that you insisted on paying for the wedding so you could show off how much money you make. She says you've been micromanaging everything and driving her crazy." I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. That's not true at all. She asked me to help, and I've been trying to be accommodating even when she keeps changing plans and adding costs. "I figured it was something like that," Thomas said. "Just wanted you to know what's being said." After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence. All this time, I'd been pouring my heart, time, and money into Megan's wedding, hoping to strengthen our relationship. And behind my back, she'd been painting me as some sort of controlling villain. Still, I tried to rationalize the situation. Maybe there were misunderstandings on both sides. Maybe the stress of wedding planning was bringing out the worst in everyone. I decided to continue as planned, but to be more conscious of giving Megan space to make her own decisions. The final venue payment of $8,000 came due, and I transferred the money without comment. The following week, I paid the remaining balance to the photographer. All told, I had now spent $35,000 on the wedding, with only a few smaller payments remaining before the event. Despite my concerns, I booked my flight to Hawaii and reserved a room at the resort where the wedding would take place. Whatever tensions existed, I was still determined to be there for my sister's special day and to see the culmination of all our planning efforts. The wedding was now just 1 week away. My suitcase stood half-packed in my bedroom, and my out-of-office email response was scheduled to activate in 3 days. Despite the lingering tensions with Megan, I was looking forward to the trip to Hawaii and hoping that seeing the beautiful venue in person would make all the stressful planning worth it. That evening, I stayed late at the office catching up on work before my vacation. Around 9:30, as I was reviewing a client proposal, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Megan, but it had been sent to a group that included my parents and Bradley. "Christie, we've been talking and decided it would be best if you didn't come to the wedding. Your presence makes everyone uncomfortable, and this is my special day. We still expect you to cover the costs as promised, since everything is already arranged." I stared at the message in disbelief, certain I must be misunderstanding. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I tried to formulate a response, when another message appeared. This one, from my mother. "We think this is for the best, Christie. Megan has been very stressed about your controlling attitude, and she deserves to enjoy her wedding day without walking on eggshells around you." A third message followed quickly, from my father. "Son, sometimes the best gift you can give is your absence. Megan needs this day to be perfect." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I couldn't process it. I had spent $35,000 of my own money, countless hours planning, all to give Megan her dream wedding, and this was how they repaid me? I tried calling Megan, but my call went straight to voicemail. Same with my parents. It was clear they had made their decision and weren't interested in discussion. Dazed, I gathered my things and left the office. The drive home was a blur. Once inside my condo, I poured myself a strong drink and tried to make sense of what had just happened. Had I really been that controlling? I reviewed the past months of interactions in my mind. Yes, I had opinions about the planning, but I had also deferred to Megan on countless decisions. I had increased the budget multiple times to accommodate her changing wishes. How did that make me someone whose presence would ruin the wedding? Unable to sleep, I opened my laptop and began scrolling through social media, looking for clues. What I found only deepened my hurt. Several family members had made vague posts about toxic people and setting boundaries that, given the timing, seemed clearly directed at me. A cousin had posted about being excited for the drama-free celebration, with Megan commenting a heart emoji. The narrative had been constructed without my knowledge or input. In their version of reality, I was the villain who had tried to take over Megan's wedding, and now they were bravely standing up to me by uninviting me. Around 2 in the morning, I received a text from my cousin Thomas. "Just heard what happened. That's messed up, man. You okay?" I called him immediately, desperate for someone to talk to. "They uninvited me from the wedding," I said when he answered, my voice breaking. "After everything I've done, all the money I've spent, they just decided I shouldn't be there." "I know," Thomas said gently. "Aunt Linda called my mom to tell her. They're spinning some story about how you were trying to make the wedding all about you." "That's not true," I insisted. "I was just trying to help. Megan asked me to pay for everything. She asked for my input on planning." "I believe you," Thomas assured me. "And for what it's worth, not everyone is buying their version of events. A few people have asked me if it's really fair for them to take your money but not want you there." "What am I supposed to do now?" I asked, feeling utterly lost. "What do you want to do?" It was a simple question, but I had no immediate answer. Part of me wanted to call Megan and beg to be included, to apologize for whatever perceived offenses had led to this decision. Another part wanted to lash out, to withdraw all financial support and let them figure out how to pay for the lavish wedding themselves. And a third part, the most wounded part, just wanted to retreat and never speak to any of them again. "I don't know," I finally admitted. "You don't have to decide anything tonight," Thomas said kindly. "Get some sleep if you can. Things might be clearer in the morning." Sleep didn't come easily, but eventually I drifted off into a restless slumber filled with dreams of showing up at a wedding where no one could see or hear me. The next morning, I woke to more text messages. These were from extended family members and some of Megan's friends, people I barely knew, telling me I should do the right thing and stop trying to ruin Megan's happiness. It seemed the character assassination campaign was in full swing. I called in sick to work, something I rarely did, and spent the day in a daze, alternating between crushing hurt and simmering anger. By evening, the anger was winning out. I had been used, manipulated, and discarded, all while being painted as the villain. I decided to reach out one more time, sending a group text to Megan, Bradley, and my parents. "I think we need to have an actual conversation about this decision rather than hiding behind text messages. Can we please talk?" Hours passed with no response. Finally, around midnight, Megan replied, "There's nothing to discuss. The decision is made. We appreciate your financial contribution, but your presence would cause too much stress." That was the moment something broke inside me. The final thread of hope that this was all a misunderstanding, that we could somehow reconcile, snapped cleanly. In its place grew a cold, clear certainty. I had been nothing but a checkbook to them all along. My feelings, my generosity, my desire for family connection meant nothing. I looked up at the ceiling of my bedroom, tears streaming silently down my face. The pain was overwhelming, but beneath it was something else, something stronger beginning to take form, resolve. For the first time in my life, I was going to stand up for myself against my family's manipulation. Whatever happened next, I would not allow myself to be treated this way any longer. I woke early the next morning with a strange sense of calm. The emotional storm of the previous day had passed, leaving behind a clear, cold determination. I made myself coffee, sat down at my kitchen counter, and began to methodically plan my response. First, I reviewed all the contracts and payment agreements I had made for the wedding. Most had been paid in full already, but there were still several final payments pending, including the remaining balance for the catering, the videographer, and some rental equipment. Next, I called my friend Aaron, who happened to be a contract lawyer. I explained the situation and asked for his professional opinion on my obligations. Legally speaking, since your name is on these contracts, you're responsible for the payments, he explained. But given the circumstances, you could certainly choose to cancel any services that haven't been fully paid for yet. You might lose deposits, but you wouldn't be liable for the full amounts. And what about the money I've already spent? I asked. That's likely gone, Aaron said sympathetically. Unless you had some written agreement with your sister about repayment, which I'm guessing you didn't. No, I admitted. It was a gift, an extremely generous one, Aaron noted. And for what it's worth, I think uninviting you after accepting that gift is morally reprehensible, even if it's not legally actionable. After hanging up with Aaron, I spent the next hour carefully reviewing my options. I could continue funding the wedding despite being uninvited, which felt like allowing myself to be used. I could withdraw all financial support completely, potentially forcing the wedding to be canceled and causing a family rift that might never heal. Or I could find some middle ground. By mid-morning, I had made my decision. I opened my laptop and drafted a message to Megan, Bradley, and my parents. I've respected your wishes and canceled my flight to Hawaii. Since you don't want me at the event, I also won't be funding it any further. All remaining payments have been canceled. The $35,000 already spent is my wedding gift to you. Good luck with the remaining $30,000 due next week. I read it over several times, making sure my tone was firm but not vindictive. Then I hit send. Next, I methodically worked through the list of vendors, calling each one to cancel any pending payments. I explained that I would not be attending the wedding and would not be responsible for any charges beyond what had already been paid. Some were understanding, others less so. But by lunchtime, I had removed my financial responsibility from all remaining wedding expenses. Then I turned my attention to the shared cloud storage account where all the wedding planning documents were kept. I spent an hour downloading and securing copies of all payment records, contracts, and correspondence, making sure I had documentation of every dollar I had spent. Once that was done, I systematically revoked access for Megan, Bradley, and my parents, changed the password, and began deleting the 55 planning files, photos, spreadsheets, and contracts we had accumulated over the months. The wedding website I had created was the last to go. Taken down with a few clicks, it was early afternoon when the first panicked call came in from Megan. I let it go to voicemail. Then my father called. Then my mother. Then Bradley. Text messages began flooding in, ranging from confused to desperate to angry. What did you do to the wedding website? The venue says the final payment was canceled. You can't just back out now. Everything is planned. Call me back immediately. I read each message but responded to none of them. Instead, I drafted one final email, attaching PDFs of all the payments I had already made, totaling $35,000. As requested, I will not be attending the wedding. I have canceled all remaining financial commitments. Attached is documentation of the $35,000 I have already contributed, which will not be withdrawn. Any additional costs are now your responsibility. Please do not contact me again regarding this matter. Then I blocked all their numbers and email addresses. The immediate barrage stopped, but I knew it was only temporary. They would find other ways to reach me, other family members to enlist in pressuring me. But for now, I needed space to process what had happened and to protect myself from further manipulation. I canceled my planned vacation time at work and threw myself back into projects that had been neglected during wedding planning. My team was surprised to see me but asked few questions when I explained simply that family plans had changed. That evening, I called Thomas to let him know what I had done. You really cut off the funding? He asked, sounding impressed. Just the remaining payments, I clarified. They still get the benefit of the $35,000 I already spent. That seems more than fair, Thomas said. How are you feeling about it all? I considered the question carefully. Honestly, part of me feels terrible. Like I've ruined Megan's wedding. But another part feels free. Like I've finally stopped a pattern that's been hurting me my entire life. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing, Thomas offered. You can't let people treat you like an ATM machine with no feelings. After our call, I made one final decision. I needed physical and digital distance from the situation. I booked a cabin at a remote retreat in Vermont, somewhere with minimal cell service and no internet access. I would take the vacation time I had already scheduled, not to attend a wedding in Hawaii, but to heal and reflect in solitude. Before leaving, I set up email and phone filters to direct any messages from family to a separate folder I could review when I was ready. I packed hiking gear, books, and a journal, determined to use this time for self-discovery rather than self-pity. As I drove away from Boston toward the Vermont mountains, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. For the first time in months, perhaps years, I was making choices based solely on what was best for me, not on a desperate hope for family approval that never seemed to come. The cabin was exactly what I needed, simple but comfortable, surrounded by forest and hiking trails. For 5 days, I hiked, read, wrote in my journal, and allowed myself to feel the full range of emotions about what had happened. I cried sometimes, raged other times, but gradually, I began to find perspective. By the time I returned to cell phone range, the wedding date had passed. I had dozens of missed calls and messages, which I downloaded but didn't immediately review. I wasn't ready yet to re-engage with the chaos. Instead, I drove back to Boston with a renewed sense of purpose and self-respect. When I finally felt strong enough to review the messages I had received during my retreat, I found exactly what I had expected. A progression from anger to threats to desperate pleading. The earliest messages from Megan were filled with rage. "How dare you pull funding at the last minute? You're deliberately trying to ruin my wedding. I always knew you were jealous of me. This proves it. You are dead to this family after what you've done." My parents' initial messages were similarly hostile, accusing me of being petty and vindictive. Bradley's messages were less frequent, but included vague threats about making me pay for what I had done. As the wedding date approached, the tone shifted dramatically. "Please, Christie, we can work this out. Just reinstate the payments. We didn't mean you couldn't come at all, just that maybe you could be less involved. The venue is threatening to cancel everything if we don't pay by tomorrow." The most recent messages, sent after the wedding date, were a mix of resentment and forced civility. "Thanks to you, we had to move the entire wedding to a cheap hotel ballroom instead of the beach. Mom and Dad had to take out a loan to cover what you refused to pay. The wedding happened anyway, no thanks to you." Bradley's band friends stepped up to help, unlike family. I set the phone down, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Part of me felt guilty for the chaos I had caused, but a stronger part recognized that I had simply refused to continue being exploited. The consequences were the natural result of their actions, not mine. Curious about what had actually happened with the wedding, I reached out to Thomas, who I knew had attended. "It was definitely scaled down from what was planned," he confirmed when we spoke. "They moved it from the beachfront venue to a conference room at the hotel, where everyone was staying. The guest list got cut in half, and a lot of the fancy extras disappeared." "How did they cover the costs?" I asked. "From what I heard, your parents took out a loan for about $15,000. Bradley's parents chipped in another $10,000, which apparently caused a huge fight because they hadn't planned to contribute anything. And a bunch of smaller expenses got divided among family members. Your Aunt Martha is still complaining about being stuck with the bill for the flowers. And Megan? How did she take it all?" Thomas hesitated. "She put on a brave face during the actual ceremony, but I overheard her having a meltdown the night before about how everything was ruined. She's definitely telling everyone it's all your fault, though." Over the next few weeks, I began receiving direct messages from various family members. Their approaches varied widely. My Aunt Susan wrote a lengthy email acknowledging that while my timing wasn't ideal, the family's treatment of me had been unfair. "You've always been expected to give more than you receive," she wrote. Maybe this was the wake-up call everyone needed. In contrast, my Uncle Robert sent a scathing message about family loyalty and how I had humiliated everyone with my childish revenge. My father's message was brief and stiff. "We should talk when things have cooled down." My mother didn't contact me directly, but apparently told various relatives that she was heartbroken by Christie's betrayal. Megan and Bradley remained hostile in their limited communications, making it clear they blamed me entirely for the downsized wedding. But interestingly, several of Megan's friends reached out with much more nuanced perspectives. "I never realized how much you were contributing," one wrote. "Megan always made it sound like you were just helping a little bit, in exchange for controlling everything. What actually happened seems very different." About a month after the wedding, I received an unexpected call from my Uncle Thomas, my father's brother. who had always been kind to me but with whom I wasn't particularly close. "I wanted to check on you," he said. "This whole situation seems to have divided the family, and I wanted to hear your side directly." I explained everything, from my initial offer to the planning process, to the shocking uninvitation. Uncle Thomas listened without interrupting. "I've known your parents for 40 years, he finally said, "and I love them, but they've never treated you fairly. What happened with this wedding is just a more extreme version of a pattern that's existed your whole life." His validation brought tears to my eyes. "I've spent so much time wondering if I overreacted," I admitted. "You didn't," he said firmly. "In fact, I think you showed remarkable restraint. Many people would have canceled everything after being treated that way." That conversation marked a turning point in my healing process. Having someone from within the family acknowledge the dysfunctional patterns I had experienced all my life gave me permission to trust my own perceptions. I began seeing a therapist who specialized in family dynamics. Dr. Gabrielle helped me understand that the wedding fiasco was merely a symptom of much deeper issues. "You were the family scapegoat," she explained during one session. "It's a common dynamic in dysfunctional families. One child is designated, often unconsciously, to carry the family's negative projections. No matter what you did, you would never have received the approval you were seeking." "So funding the wedding was doomed from the start?" I asked. "Most likely," she nodded. "But recognizing these patterns is the first step toward breaking them. The question now is, what kind of relationship do you want with your family moving forward, if any?" It was a profound question that I couldn't immediately answer. I needed time to consider what healthy boundaries might look like, and whether reconciliation was possible or even desirable. 2 months after the wedding, I received my first direct contact from Bradley, a text message that surprised me with its relatively conciliatory tone. "I know things got really messed up with the wedding. For what it's worth, I didn't agree with uninviting you. That was mainly Megan and your parents. I should have spoken up more. I appreciated the partial apology, but noted that it still placed most of the blame elsewhere. Still, it was the first crack in the united front my family had presented against me. Through the family grapevine, I heard more about the aftermath of the wedding. My parents were struggling to pay back the loan they had taken out. Megan and Bradley had canceled their planned honeymoon because they couldn't afford it after covering the emergency wedding expenses. There were lingering resentments between Bradley's family and mine over the last-minute financial contributions. While I took no pleasure in their difficulties, I recognized that these were the natural consequences of their choices, not mine. I had offered an incredibly generous gift, which they had accepted while simultaneously rejecting me as a person. No reasonable individual would continue funding an event they were explicitly told not to attend. 3 months after the wedding, my path unexpectedly crossed with Megan's when we both attended a distant cousin's funeral in Chicago. We exchanged awkward nods, but didn't speak during the service. Afterward, as I was leaving, she approached me in the parking lot. "So you're just not going to talk to any of us ever again?" she asked, her tone accusatory. I took a deep breath. I'm open to conversations that include genuine accountability, but not to being blamed for problems that resulted from your choices. "My wedding was ruined because of you," she retorted. "Your wedding was relocated because you uninvited the person paying for it," I corrected calmly. "That was your decision. We just wanted one day without your controlling attitude. You didn't have to cancel everything." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something I hadn't before. Behind the anger was a profound inability to take responsibility for her actions. In that moment, I felt an unexpected emotion: pity. "I wish you well, Megan, I really do," I said sincerely. "But I need to go now." As I drove away, I realized that interaction had clarified something important. Reconciliation would only be possible if there was recognition of the harm done and willingness to change the dysfunctional patterns. Until then, distance was the healthiest choice for me. 6 months passed after the wedding debacle, bringing with it a new sense of perspective and peace. The raw wound of betrayal had gradually healed into something less painful. A scar that reminded me of important lessons learned, rather than an open injury that dominated my thoughts. My therapy sessions with Dr. Gabrielle continued, helping me understand the family dynamics that had shaped so much of my life and self-perception. I learned to recognize the patterns of the past without being controlled by them, to acknowledge the hurt without letting it define me. Family relationships exist on a spectrum. Dr. Gabrielle explained during one particularly insightful session. Total estrangement and complete reconciliation are the extremes, but most healthy resolutions fall somewhere in between. The question is, what level of relationship serves your well-being? It was a question I considered carefully as I began cautiously re-establishing contact with certain family members. My approach was selective and measured, based on how individuals had behaved during and after the wedding situation. With Uncle Thomas and Aunt Susan, who had shown genuine understanding and support, I developed closer relationships than we'd had before. Our conversations became more frequent and meaningful, creating family connections that were actually nurturing rather than draining. For relatives who had been neutral or only mildly critical, I maintained polite but limited contact. Holiday greetings, occasional messages, but no deep engagement or vulnerability. With those who had been actively hostile or completely unacknowledging of their role in the situation, including my parents and Megan, I established clear boundaries. I didn't seek out contact but responded civilly when approached, provided the interactions remained respectful. My father was the first to reach out among my immediate family, with a brief text 3 months after our encounter at the funeral. "Your mother and I would like to meet for dinner next time you're in Chicago." After discussing it with Dr. Gabrielle, I agreed to the meeting, with certain personal boundaries firmly in place. We met at a neutral restaurant, and the conversation was strained but civil. Neither of my parents directly apologized for their role in the wedding situation, but my father made a comment that was the closest he'd ever come to acknowledgement. "We may have handled some things poorly in the past. Family is complicated." It wasn't much, but it was something. We established a tentative new relationship. More distant than before, but not completely severed. Monthly phone calls, occasional visits, but with clear boundaries around topics like money and Megan. Speaking of Megan, our relationship remained the most strained. She maintained that I had deliberately sabotaged her wedding out of jealousy, a narrative that made reconciliation difficult. We had minimal direct contact, though I heard updates about her life through other family members. Bradley, interestingly, made more efforts than Megan to repair the relationship. He reached out occasionally with neutral messages about his music career or general life updates. I responded in kind, keeping things light and uncontroversial. I suspected he recognized, more than Megan did, how unreasonable the uninvitation had been after accepting such significant financial support. As my family relationships found their new equilibrium, other aspects of my life flourished. Without the emotional drain and financial burden of the wedding planning, I refocused on my business, securing several major new clients and expanding my team. I also invested more time in friendships that had sometimes taken a back seat to family drama. These relationships, built on mutual respect and genuine care, provided the emotional support I had always sought from family but rarely received. About 9 months after the wedding, I received an unexpected message from Megan. "I'm going to be in Boston next week for a job interview. Would you be willing to meet for coffee?" I agreed with some trepidation. We met at a cafe near my office, and the initial conversation was awkward, focusing on safe topics like her job prospects and the Boston weather. But eventually, she broached the subject we both knew needed addressing. "I've been doing some thinking about the wedding situation," she said, stirring her coffee. "I was talking to a friend who's a therapist, and she helped me see some things differently." I waited, not wanting to interrupt what seemed like a difficult admission for her. "I still think your timing was terrible," Megan continued. "But I can understand why you reacted the way you did after we uninvited you. That wasn't fair, especially after everything you contributed." It wasn't a full apology, but coming from Megan, it was significant. "Thank you for saying that," I replied. "I regret how everything played out too. None of it was what I hoped for when I offered to help with your wedding. We're probably never going to completely agree about what happened," she said, "but I miss having a brother. Do you think we could try to move forward somehow?" The question touched me more deeply than I expected. Despite everything, she was still my sister, the person who shared my childhood memories and family history. "I think we can try," I said cautiously. But things would need to be different. More honest. More respectful on both sides. We talked for another hour, not solving everything, but taking the first steps toward a new kind of sibling relationship. One built on adult understanding, rather than childhood patterns. As I approached the 1-year mark from the wedding incident, I reflected on all that had changed. The painful experience had forced me to confront family dynamics I had previously accepted as normal. It had pushed me to establish boundaries I should have set years earlier, and most importantly, it had freed me from the exhausting cycle of seeking approval that was never going to come. I realized that while $35,000 was a significant amount of money, it was perhaps the best investment I had ever made. Not in a wedding, but in my own freedom and self-respect. The experience had taught me priceless lessons. First, genuine relationships can't be purchased. No amount of money or generosity will transform a dysfunctional relationship into a healthy one if the underlying patterns remain unchanged. Second, setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary. By clearly defining what treatment I would and wouldn't accept, I had actually created the possibility for more authentic connections. Third, family is about more than blood. Some of my relatives had shown me more understanding and support than my immediate family ever had. And friends had stepped up in ways that reminded me that chosen family can be just as meaningful as biological ties. Finally, self-respect must come before people-pleasing. By standing up for myself, even at the cost of temporary family harmony, I had broken a lifelong pattern of accepting mistreatment in exchange for crumbs of approval. These lessons hadn't come easily. There had been moments of doubt, nights of tears, and periods of intense loneliness. But on the other side of that pain was a more authentic life, relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation, and a stronger sense of self. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the Boston sunset, my phone buzzed with a text from Uncle Thomas. Just checking in. How are you doing these days? I smiled as I typed my response. Better than I've been in years, actually. Still figuring things out, but on my own terms now. And that was the truth. The wedding that never was had ultimately given me something far more valuable than any celebration could have. The freedom to define my own worth, independent of family approval or validation. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who took your generosity for granted? What helped you find the strength to stand up for yourself? Share your experiences in the comments below. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in these struggles can be incredibly healing. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to prioritize their own well-being, even when family is involved. Thank you for listening. And remember, you deserve relationships that value you for who you are, not just what you can provide.